Hey everyone and welcome to another video, and today guys I'm going to be breaking down the mid lane meta heading into Worlds. And because we're like 9 or 10 days out from Worlds right now, I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about why we're going to see priority on certain champions and why they're strong in the first place, and why other champions are really not going to get prioritized at all or maybe much lower. Now the way I want to do this video is talk about the mid meta obviously, but in order to get a very accurate representation of the mid lane meta, we also need to talk about the junglers. So we're going to do a mid lane tier list, and then alongside that we're also going to do a separate tier list ranking all the junglers, who's strong, who's weak, and what I believe we're going to see priority on. And then also we need to talk about the 10.19 Worlds patch. This was just a preview that Mark Yetta tweeted not too long ago. We've got to touch on that as well. So this is going to be very in-depth, but if you're interested in getting a better understanding of Worlds and what you're seeing in draft phases and what you're seeing basically in any of the games, this video should be pretty helpful. So let's kick it off with what I believe to be the champions that are basically on another level. And the first one we need to talk about is Lucian. Now Lucian, I don't like using the word overpowered, but I can't really refrain myself from using it. I genuinely feel Lucian is overpowered right now. And there's actually a bunch of reasons for that. And on top of that, guys, there's probably been 3 or 4 instances in my time playing League over the past 10 years where I genuinely felt a champion was like ridiculously overpowered and Riot screwed up. That was maybe like Aurelia in Season 2, Season 3, was it Season 3? Vladimir back then, Kassadin back then as well, when Kassadin had a silence. There's certain champions where I'm like, alright, Riot really did screw up, and I'm kind of getting those vibes from Lucian, maybe not to the same extent, but for differing reasons. And the first one is that Lucian's a flex. He's actually a 3-way flex, top, mid, bot. Now, you can't really put a value on flex picks in competitive play because it gives you a ridiculous amount of flexibility in terms of your drafts, confuses your enemy, and doesn't really give away your composition. You can put Lucian mid and play with his very heavy AD, carry-oriented mid laner that doesn't really offer much utility, and then complement it with maybe a utility jungler. You can also put it in the bot lane, even though we probably won't see it as much because it's got such a low range, and then, you know, play a mage mid lane with that to kind of create space for the Lucian. Or you can also use it as a niche counter pick top lane and to punish certain picks as well. So this is very valuable for competitive play, and is a big reason why Lucian will be potentially, in my opinion, banned every single game. Now, the other reason is that Lucian actually has a lot of flexible build paths. If you're versing a lot of HP stacking opponents, you can just build Bork into Essence Reaver. You could even go Manamune into Essence Reaver into IE if you're versing very, scaling champions and you have a lot of freedom in the early game. You can also go straight Essence Reaver into IE for maybe a little bit earlier spiking than you would with Manamune. Or you can straight up go Sanguine Blade for a lethality item, dominate your opponent, maybe if you're the only AD on your team, and be an insanely high pressure mid lane threat. So there's a lot of ways to actually play Lucian as well, which again, add to that threat, or why I believe Lucian is so strong. And on top of that, the last thing is Lucian barely has any counter picks. The only picks that I believe that does somewhat okay is maybe like Azir mid, like a very good Azir player. Maybe Zoe. I mean, Zoe could be potentially picked into Lucian because it forces Lucian to take cleanse, and if Lucian has to take cleanse, then his early strength is considerably weaker because he can't take heal for those 2v2s, and he can't really take ignite without getting CC'd and just dying. Twisted Fate may potentially be picked into Lucian, not because he'll win the matchup, but because he, again, forces Lucian to take cleanse. Twisted Fate can go resolve secondary, that sort of thing, but then you'd really want to see a high damage jungler to complement that, which I don't even know if that's going to be the meta. So there are a lot of question marks around what the actual counter picks are to Lucian. So that's another reason. I mean, maybe I don't know, but it seems to me like there's very little counterplay, so it'll probably just be banned every single game. Next one's Akali here, guys. Now, Akali is very problematic for a lot of players to deal with because, okay, let's just say, let's bring it back to why Akali wasn't seen for quite a while. One of the reasons was the wave clear, but they did buff the wave clear, and I think Akali was getting a little bit of a nerf here. I'm not sure if this, or how much this affects her breakpoint in terms of one-shotting the backline, the range creeps, but one of the main reasons Akali wasn't seen was because it took her, I mean, she would get punished so incredibly hard pre-Gunblade that the game would kind of explode. But since the Q buffs and since, the rise in popularity of Fleet Footwork with Doran Shield, that sort of thing, Akali can basically minimize any single matchup, get to a Gunblade, in which she has one of the strongest one-item spikes in the entire game. She goes from like an average, very average assassin to an incredibly threatening assassin in one item. And on top of that, an assassin that can both side lane, scale well, and even take Conqueror if need be, and be an incredibly annoying side lane champion to deal with as well. That it can even counter most bruisers or even a lot of tanks if you head into mid to late game. So Akali has a lot of flexibility with her runes, with her build path, spikes relatively early in the game. And the difference between Akali and competitive play and solo queue, guys, is that power trough before Gunblade actually means much less in competitive play because games are played much slower. In solo queue, a lot can happen pre-Gunblade in which the game can kind of explode. But in competitive play, yes, Akali may not get much pressure and her early kill threat might be kind of low. But people can play around that. Junglers can defend their side laners. They're not going to randomly get cheesed in their jungle. People know how to ward properly. They know how to jungle track. People are very good at minimizing the early lane. That's why I think another reason why we will see Akali in which she does get to a Gunblade and then things kind of turn. It's actually a very similar reason, by the way, why I think Sylas, where is Sylas here? Sylas is actually similar in some form of way because with Fleet Footwork and the Q-Max strategy, you can minimize a lot of matchups in which you can get to your GLP or your Proto Belt or whatever you're playing for relatively easy, and that power trough, not really much happens. So, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this Worlds will be played much faster, but that is a reason why Akali is, one of the reasons Akali is quite strong. And then on top of that, obviously she creates a lot of space, a lot of threat in those mid-game team fights, and on top of that, we're seeing a lot of immobile AD carries at the moment. We're not seeing as much Xayah anymore. Yes, we see Ezreal, in which Ezreal can be a little bit problematic for Akali because he's not really auto attack reliant. He has skill shots. But we are going to be seeing probably a lot of Jhin and Ashe, in which Akali, I think, will be pretty good into those immobile AD carries. So keep an open mind. It may not be on the same level as Lucian, but it will be incredibly prioritized. And on top of that, Akali is also a flex mid-top, which adds that draft flexibility as well. Now, let's just put Sylas to the side for now. We'll come back to Sylas. The next champion I want to talk about is Zoe. Now, Zoe, for a similar reason, she has that flexibility component where she can go airy with heal and play those short trades, be a lane 1v1 bully and be a bit of a nuisance in the early game. She can also go electrocute with ignite and play for those 2v2 and burst oriented 2v2s with her jungler. She can also go unsealed spellbook with TP, with Nimbus Cloak, scale into mid game, play around those objectives, control those choke points and be a bit of a nuisance in those skirmishes. Now, because the game, I believe the way League of Legends is actually heading, and this is actually why China and Korea and now EU also have or produce such high quality talent, is because the games are much faster paced and people experience a lot more skirmishes. And the game is incredibly reliant or decided on skirmishes at the highest level. People are not going to get stomped in lane incredibly hard. They're not really going to get solo killed. So most action or most meaningful leads are generated through skirmishing. Now, all of these three champions so far, Akali, Lucian, and Zoe, are very good in just scrappy skirmishes. Champions that both either have a lot of threat, have a lot of mobility, are hard to lock down, and spike relatively early into the game. These are the champions that I really look out for. And on top of that, they complement any of those scrappy 2v2 mid-jungle skirmishes at nearly all portions of the game. And maybe kind of outside of Akali. But anyway, skirmishing is a very important part of the game. And I think Zoe's kit is just designed for skirmishing. People are blowing summoners. You can pick up summoners. You've got a really annoying hard form of CC. Your damage is relatively burst oriented, which is great in skirmishes as well. That sort of thing. Now, another benefit of Zoe that is potentially overlooked by a lot of people is that she forces a lot of people to take cleanse. She forces mid laners to take cleanse. And if you're versing, say, an assassin or maybe a champion that maybe wanted to be in the side lane in mid game, you're forcing them to take cleanse instead of TP, which reduces their effectiveness in the side lane significantly because then they're just going to have to group. They're not going to be able to stay in the side, TP flank, that sort of thing. So forcing the enemy to take cleanse over TP can be a very big deal. And if Zoe takes TP herself, especially with Unsealed Spellbook, she's going to find an opportunity to create tempo, and maybe that can lead to a roam play, a dive play on a side lane, or objective control, or river control, or, you know, any form of lead in itself. So Zoe is a pick that I think will be prioritized a lot. So keep your eye out for Zoe. It'll just be interesting to see what it's paired with, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the junglers. Let's talk about Orianna. I think Orianna is still going to be a very strong pick. And the reason I think I'm such a big fan of Orianna is because of how flexible she is as well. She has the scaling component, the team fighting component, but she also can like win lane. She can go phase rush with Scorch, and she can even go time warp tonic with Biscuits with corrupting pot and play relatively fast paced and aggressive if need be. Base for early Dark Seals, maybe like a Dark Seal Doran's and Luden's burst oriented fights if she wants to do that. She can also play slow. She can go Seraphs straight into Rabadons, or Seraphs into Liandry's against heavy frontline. She can go Seraphs into Spellbinder for a little bit more burst. With maybe Phase Rush, Gathering Storm, Magical Footwear, Biscuits with Doran's Ring Start and play much slower. Orianna has that very flexible component, which I really like about Orianna, and her 2v2 skirmishing is not too bad as well. So Orianna is a pick I think will be seen a lot, which does lead me to some niche picks here. Echo. I'm going to put Echo in interesting tier here. And we're going to jump around a little bit. I'm not going to do this in like a very sequential order. I'm just going to jump around and throw out my ideas. We did see Echo in the LCK. I think it was one of the games into an Orianna. I'm not 100% sure. But Echo traditionally has been a very good pick into Orianna if you want that early pressure and you want more of a, you're versing a relatively squishy team composition. Echo can come into play. The other thing as well, Echo does quite well into Nidalee. And Nidalee is a common, even Graves to be honest with you, because they have very little CC, and Echo is largely countered by CC. Echo wasn't seen when you see a lot of those tank junglers like Zac, Sejuani, Trundle and things like that, because they have CC to lock down this Echo in team fights, but Nidalee and Graves don't really have hard CC, so Echo, especially as a counterpick into Orianna, could be seen. I don't think Echo will be seen as a flex though, but it is something to keep an eye on. We might come back to that later within this tier list. Next one's Azir. I still think Azir will be a strong pick at Worlds because, again, it has that flexibility that Orianna has. You can go Halo Blades if need be, play very aggressive. Azir actually has probably some of the most favorable matchups in the current meta. He actually does get pressure in majority of lanes, because in solo queue, most people counter Azir, or the counter to Azir is like crazy assassins, right? Like Echo or like Fizz, Zed, things like that. But those champions just don't operate in competitive play. So a lot of the time, Azir just wins lane, right? You can even go Comet, you can even sit on an early lost chapter, continually push in your opponent, and have the scaling aspect. So I view Azir similar to Orianna in the sense that they're lane bullies with that scaling aspect and, you know, mid to late game team fighting aspect. And their side laning isn't as good, which actually ties me to another point I didn't even mention before, guys. Two other things. First one, the reason we also see a lot more Zoe is because of the Syndra nerfs. Syndra was one of the biggest counters to Zoe. But since the Syndra nerfs, one of the hardest matchups for Zoe is now relatively easy, or she can navigate that matchup now, which actually saw the rise in the play of Zoe, which is another reason why we will see a lot of Zoe. The other thing, which is interesting, and maybe more of a theory I've seen in solo queue, I don't know if this translates exactly to competitive play, but I think that mid laners that can actively operate in the side lane give your team a massive advantage. That is true. That's actually why I love Lucian and Akali in general, is that, let's just say the entire early game goes even, and maybe it's a very bot lane oriented game where mid laners haven't really been able to be in the game, they're farming, playing for their key item spikes. And then eventually, maybe one team breaks the bot lane tower, and then the mid laners begin to go to the side lane. If you have a mid laner that can actually operate in the side lane and either generate threat or even maybe 1v2 the enemy mid laner and the jungle, or even push deep without being scared of the enemy jungler, that can actually create a lot of advantages. Lucian can farm jungle camps, he can push very deep, he's incredibly hard to gank because he has a very low cooldown dash. Akali, the same premise, can push out very deep, incredibly hard to lock down and gank in the side lane because of her mobility. This can give you a lot more pressure, a lot more options, a lot more vision deeper in the enemy jungle, which is something, again, that you can't really put a price on. It's hard to put a value on that. So it is a concept or something that I may look out for during Worlds, is how much are we prioritizing the ability for a mid laner to go into the side lane? In previous Worlds, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, that didn't really exist because a lot of teams were just playing Ornn and just hard forcing. And like, okay, if you go to the side lane, we're just going to play Ornn, stack Rift Heralds, and force the 5v5, in which you're just going to have to group anyway. So we'll have to see what teams actually prioritize, and that's where other roles really come into play. Now, what else do we have here? Actually, another little thing here, guys. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. A big reason I also like these three champions is that they're all very hard to gank. Azir has an escape, Akali has escape, Lucian has escape. That's also why we usually see Leblanc. Where's Leblanc? We usually see Leblanc at Worlds. Leblanc is great for a multitude of reasons. I'm going to put it in comp dependent though, because Leblanc is incredibly hard to gank. So when you see a lot of junglers, or maybe you see the meta turn towards a lot of threats or gank setup, Leblanc comes into play because it's both hard to gank and has gank setup herself, which creates a lot of options in the early game. So maybe some of the Chinese teams, or maybe even G2 might pull out their like Caps or Knight or teams like that who play relatively aggressive might actually whip out the Leblanc to really create a bit of chaos in the early game. We may even see it as a response to Orianna. We may see it as a response to Akali, because LeBlanc traditionally was a bit of a counter to Akali. We may even see it into Azir. I don't know. I don't really know those matchups well enough, but it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if we do see LeBlanc later in the competition. And on top of that, a lot of the junglers actually do very bad into LeBlanc as well, like Graves and Nidalee. Again, very little lockdown, and LeBlanc is largely countered by CC. Now, Galio. It's hard for me. I mean, I still think Galio will be A tier. I just think that with the rise of a lot of these carry junglers, we see, what's that jungler's name? Selfmade playing things like Eve. We're seeing a lot more Hecarim, things like that. I wouldn't be surprised if certain teams prioritize Galio if they want to go down that specific route. Because if you're not getting utility from the jungle, you got to get utility from elsewhere. So teams that prioritize Galio may be more of those carry-oriented teams in the jungle, the jungle carry-oriented teams. I don't know. I still think Galio has a place, especially the Chinese teams. I think they will put a bit of priority onto this Galio, and Galio is decent into Akali in those mid-game team fights, so it wouldn't surprise me if we see Galio as a pick into Akali. It does struggle into Azir, so it won't be blind picked. It does kind of struggle into Orianna if you don't have a game plan with it, and it definitely can't be picked into Lucian. So be a bit more situational, but I'm still going to put it in the A tier strong. And I've got a list here of other mids. What else are we missing here? We got Katarina, Echo, Aurelia. Okay, so Yasuo. Yasuo is always randomly picked at Worlds as a niche strategy. So Yasuo wouldn't surprise me if we see it into Orianna in combination with a Gragas. We'll talk about Gragas later on, because I do think Gragas will be seen, obviously because Runic Echoes is very strong, and I think if Lucian goes through, Lucian may be seen in combination with Gragas. But Yasuo, or teams that can actually play Yasuo, potentially even as a flex in bot lane, I think that could be a niche strategy, so watch out for Yasuo. What else have we got here, guys? Syndra. Now, Syndra, again, her power trough is way less meaningful in competitive play, because not much really happens during the time where she doesn't have the mana for her Q. So her Q mana nerfs were largely in the early, first 3 or 4 points of her Q, in which, yes, in solo queue that may be meaningful because things can happen, the game can get out of your control, things like that. But I still think Syndra is very strong. It doesn't have many bad matchups. It's a relatively safe blind pick. It has a decent amount of pressure relatively early in the game. It scales to mid to late game very well, especially if you go phase rush and you go that build where you're going, Ludens into Spellbinder, into Liandry's or something like that, or even GLP into Liandry's into Spellbinder, which is something I didn't even talk about with Zoe, by the way. she can alter her build. She can actually go GOP and be more of a utility champion for her team if she wants to be played with more of a carry-oriented jungler. For example, Zoe Graves, right? Zoe Graves is a very great mid-jungle 2v2, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but she can create space for Graves, offer the CC, slow down the enemy, and allow Graves to get the damage off. Very similar to Syndra. So Syndra may be prioritized. I think she actually will be prioritized alongside a champion like Zoe and Orianna for a very, I guess, safe, reliable mid lane blind pick. I think, though, Syndra won't be as good into a champion like Akali now because Akali just takes fleet, and because of those Q nerfs to Syndra can largely escape the early game. So Syndra will be a champion that will be prioritized. And I don't think Syndra will be flexed into bot lane anymore as well, because I think Syndra bot just gets destroyed by those higher range AD carries like Ashe, even like Jhin, things like that. Even Ezreal, to be honest. I don't even think Syndra does that well anymore because of those nerfs. So, yeah, mainly just a mid pick right now. What else have we got here, guys? The other pick that I actually had here was Kassadin. Now, I want to keep an eye on Kassadin because Kassadin is actually a very good or decent counter pick into Sylas. And Sylas will be a pick on patch 10.19 because it's actually getting another buff here. Our cooldown reduced from 160 to 100 to 40 seconds, which is a relatively nice buff there. Especially when you're having CDR, your level 3 ultimate's going to be ridiculous. And Sylas is a flex, so I do think that Sylas will be seen a lot given the rise in popularity of Fleet Fullwork and that Qmax strategy. Now, in saying that, Kassadin could be a niche counterpick into the LeBlanc if it gets blind picked or gets prioritized. It can be a niche counterpick into the Echo if need be, or to the Sylas. It's decent into Akali, kind of. I mean, in the 1v1, it's fine, but you don't have CC, and Akali's largely countered by CC. So I don't know if you'll see it into the Akali. But it is something I want to keep an eye on as a champion because Kassadin's been on my radar, and a lot of pros do talk about Kassadin. I think we have seen it in some competitive games, so I want to keep an eye on it, maybe as like an interesting pick. Definitely want to put that to the side there. Pantheon. Now, I want to highlight Pantheon here because Pantheon, we have seen it in the past, especially in China, as a very aggressive pick. Generally, Pantheon is seen in tandem with pure damage junglers that get a lot of value from CC. That's why we saw it a lot with Talia jungle, or in bot lane you see Pantheon support with Talia, vice versa. It is something to keep an eye on again. I don't really know, though, in what mid matchups it will be picked, and it may not be picked at all in the mid lane, but I do want to keep an eye on it, maybe as a flex in the jungle support, or maybe mid as a bit of a weird three-way flex. Could be decent into Sylas. Could be okay. You could definitely minimize the Zoe matchup. It'd be okay into Galio, so there would be some options there for Pantheon, potentially. So I want to keep an eye on it. I don't think it'll be overly prioritized, but it is an option. Rise, I don't think will be seen. Let's go back to the list. What else are we seeing? Kassadin, Camille, LeBlanc, Set. Oh, Set. We really need to talk about Set. Very important pick here. Where is Set? Set. I want to put in strong. Because, okay, this will make a little bit more sense as we get into the jungle tier list, but because of the strength of AP junglers, and especially junglers like Nidalee, Nidalee Set is a ridiculously strong 2v2. There's a few reasons here. Obviously, damage spread is great. Also, because Set is very independent and doesn't really require ganks because he can take Fleet Fullwork, he can go Doran Shield, he can take Resolve Secondary, he's never really going to die, he's a very safe, independent pick. But more importantly, it's the range difference. Now, not many people talk about this. I haven't really heard this mentioned anywhere, but this was something that I actively considered when I was drafting compositions back when I was a head coach. And I got this from Shenfire when we were talking about mid-jungle duos, is that when you got mid-jungle champions, you want to have a balance in terms of ranges. You want to have one champion that is relatively low range and can kind of start the fight, and then you want one higher range champion. So the beautiful thing about Set and Nidalee is that Nidalee is largely pretty high range, right? He's pretty high range champion, can sit back, non-committal. Whereas Set is a very committal champion that isn't afraid to face check brushes, isn't afraid to go into the action, create space, and be the damage soak for the higher range champion to deal damage or even, you know, use the CC to get the damage off. That's also why a lot of the time we see, you know, maybe Zoe with Graves. Graves is a very low range champion, and Zoe has a lot of high range abilities or long range CC. This is also why we see, I can't think off the top of my head, but there's a lot of combos where you have that range discrepancy. And if you have two high range champions, it very rarely works. That's why you don't want to see champions like Azir with, say, you know, obviously Azir and Nidalee, that makes a lot of sense. What's an AD champion that's high range? Not many AD champions are high range, but I can't think off the top of my head. But as a concept, guys, it may make a little bit more sense. You may see it at Worlds, is that range discrepancy is very important. Because if you have a full high range team comp, then no one's going to create space in the team fights. No one's going to be able to face check. No one's going to be able to walk in first to allow his damage or his non-committal damage champions or his range carries to actually get the damage off. So, Set really enables that, and given the rise or the strength of Runic Echoes as a jungle item, Set will be definitely prioritized. Probably seen with maybe Eve. Some teams may prioritize Eve. Some teams may play Karthus with it. Some teams may play, like I said, Nidalee. So those are the three champs I'd look out for. Set won't be played with Elise though, because Set needs a carry around him. He's not a carry-oriented champion. He needs an actual carry-oriented jungle. That's why Eve, Karthus, and Nidalee would probably be the only three that it would be played with. Now, another one here that I did want to keep an eye on as maybe an interesting pick would be Camille Mid. I don't know if we will see it at Worlds, but traditionally Camille is very good into melee matchups. I don't even know actually how the Camille versus Akali matchup goes. I can't really comment on that. Maybe as a niche strategy played with like an Elise jungle, who maybe a very aggressive team who wants to push the pace of the game, it may be seen. Or it can be a potential flex, right? A flex top and mid. So I want to keep an eye on that because I have seen, I mean, Chovy does play it in solo queue. Chovy, so some teams may whip it out. Chovy has been one of the only solo queue players that plays it, but maybe seen. Definitely want to keep an eye on it. Now, another one here I want to keep an eye on was Katarina. Where's Katarina? I'm going to put it interesting. Katarina, I mean, I haven't really spoke about this before on my channel, but I actually think Katarina is very strong right now. Not as a blind pick, but as a nice situational pick. When you see very low CC, Katarina can be incredibly problematic for the enemy team. Now, with the rise of champions like Graves and the rise of champions like Nidalee, Katarina is a very, very good counter to those champions. So, if we're seeing red side 5th pick Katarina, or like we're seeing people hold their mid pick to last pick on red side, Katarina may be whipped out because there are a lot of Katarina players. I believe Jensen even played it in Chinese Super Server Super Server solo queue. I know Showmaker is a big Katarina player. I don't know any other mid laners that are playing it, but it is something I want to keep an eye on, and it could be a really niche, interesting pick. What else do we have here? Oh, Twisted Fate. I didn't even talk about Twisted Fate. Where is Twisted Fate? There he is. I want to put it in comp dependent. Oh, maybe strong. Again, you can't really put a price on point and click CC. Twisted Fate does have that ability to alternate his builds and runes to facilitate certain things. You can go Electrocute with Time Warp Tonic and like Biscuits and play very aggressive and counter a champion like Sylas. You can also go Secondary Resolve with Unsealed Spellbook and minimize the early game. You can go... you can even go Secondary Sorcery and have a little bit more scaling. There's a lot of options with Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate's similar to Akali in the sense that you can always minimize the early game. Could be interesting. And it does offer quite a bit of utility. So we may see it with some carry junglers, although that may give you too much of a weak early mid jungle 2v2. I'm just going to put it in comp dependent. I'm not going to put it in strong. Since the Twisted Fate nerfs and things like that, I think it's very much comp dependent. But having the ability to have a point and click CC, again, it's hard to put a price on it. So yeah, that's another interesting champion. Who else are we missing here, guys? Let me have a quick scan. Victor, I don't think we're going to see. I don't think we're going to see Rise. No, no, no. Nico, maybe, because it does, again, create space in team fights. Gives you that lower range champion that can facilitate some carries. You can even go Glacial, create a lot of space. We may see it. Kale. Kale's interesting as well, to be honest with you. I think Kale is on the edge. Because, again, her power trough isn't as meaningful in competitive play right now. And it is a flex mid-top. So I want to keep an eye on Kale. I don't know enough about this champion, but it wouldn't surprise me if we do see it in very slow-paced games. Because I don't know which way the world meta is actually going to go. Is it going to be a very fast-paced game where, you know, early dives are a thing? Which was what FPX did with Galio and things like that. Or is it going to be a very much slower-paced utility meta? I don't know. We'll keep an eye on that. Talia, I don't think we'll see Talia. Lissandra, maybe as a niche counter pick. I don't really want to put it in there, though. Maybe. We can maybe put it here as a very situational pick. Who else? Let's go back to our list here. What do we got? Ori, Galio, Katarina, Echo. Okay, I think I didn't put Aurelia here. Aurelia. So Aurelia is actually getting a buff. Aurelia is getting a buff here on patch 10.19. Our barrage damage 125 to 325, 125 to 325 to 125 to 375. Our perimeter damage is increased as well by 100 at max rank, which is very nice. I've also kind of seen Aurelia to be on the edge. And again, with the rise of AP junglers, we may see a lot more Aurelia. And again, it is a nice flex mid-top. Aurelia has been traditionally very good into Orianna. It is quite good into Azir as well if you have the pressure jungler. It could also play it into Galio. It's actually pretty good into Syndra because it's very easy to dodge those skill shots. It doesn't really do as well into Akali mid lane. Traditionally, Akali was a counter to Aurelia, even though I think it's shifted a little bit now with the rise of Borkwit's end build. Definitely not a blind pick, but it wouldn't surprise me if some of the Korean mid laners in China, especially Knight. Knight's a massive Aurelia player. Things like that. A lot of even Showmaker, massive Aurelia player. These players will definitely whip it out if need be. And I'm a massive fan of Aurelia, so I think it will be seen at some point. Definitely. Corki. I didn't even think about Corki, actually. Corki does usually prop up at Worlds. Generally, if Azir is somewhat in the meta, we will see Corki, because Corki is a very good response into Azir, because Azir doesn't deal well with long range. The counter to Azir is actually poke, right? Traditionally, way in the past, the counter to Azir actually used to be things like Xerath, right? And we may even see Xerath, I don't know, but the problem with Xerath is that he's incredibly vulnerable to ganks. And now with the rise of lethal tempo Azir, where Azir can actually just proc lethal tempo and auto down the wave, Xerath isn't going to have enough control over the wave to actually poke or spend abilities or mana onto the Azir to get any meaningful poke down. So that counter pick's kind of gone out the window with the rise of lethal tempo. Then, as the great thing about a Corki, though, is that Corki's not vulnerable to ganks whatsoever. Corki has a very good form of escape and self-peel with that W, so Corki's a lot more reliable, and with the Manamune build has a lot of poke on 2 item spikes, so it wouldn't surprise me if we do see Corki as a comp-dependent pick, as a counter pick into this Azir, if Azir is relatively high priority. I think, did I talk about Echo? I spoke about Echo. I think that's all of the picks here. Let's give it a quick scan just to make sure we're not missing anything. Lux was a weird counter pick into Zoe, but I don't think I'm going to put it there. Lulu, I don't think. Kind of too low pressure. Diana. Cassio, okay, people talk about Cassio, but I just don't really think Cassio has a spot. I just think she loses way too many matchups. She gets bullied by way too many matchups. She's incredibly vulnerable to ganks. Takes a long time to spike. I may be wrong here, but my hunch is that we will not see Cassio. Very rarely. I just don't think we're going to see that champion. I think that's all for now. So what we'll do is might come back to this if we miss something, but let's actually go ahead and start talking about the jungle meta, and then start making those connections between the mid champions. So let's talk about Lillia. This champion, man, is unbelievable. Oh my god, dude. Riot completely fucked this one up, man. Lillia will be permabanned. My call is that it will be permabanned. I don't even know what the counter is to Lillia, but she has... Her mobility is ridiculous. She literally has the ability to flash Q, AoE, sleep an entire team, which again, you can't really put a value on. Her ability to generate tempo is incredibly annoying. She's very snowbally. She builds runic echoes, and junglers that build runic echoes are very annoying to deal with. And on top of that, guys, she brings utility as an AP jungler. You know how rare that is? Most AP junglers are carry junglers, right? If you think about other AP junglers, you think about Eve, you think about Elise, you think about Echo, you think about Karthus. None of these are utility. Lillia is nearly the first AP jungle that actually, or genuinely AP threat jungle that can build runic echoes and peel and have utility for his team, for her team, and bring CC to the composition. And the great thing about Lillia is that it synergizes so well with all of these picks. And it can synergize and create space for champions like Azir. It can create space for Orianna. It'd be amazing with Lucian. It'd be even solid with Akali, because Akali doesn't bring any CC. A lot of these champions would just benefit an insane amount from Lillia. So, and Lillia could theoretically be a bit of a flex pick. Top. I don't know the strength of Lillia top, but I think that Lillia is very, very, very strong and will be pretty much pick or ban during Worlds. Now, next pick I want to talk about is Shen. Now, notice here in these categories, we've got S, which is basically champions on another level. Then we've got utility junglers, we've got carry junglers, we've got situational ones, and then we've got like interesting picks. We may not even put any in there, but I do want to talk about utility junglers. Now, the interesting thing about this Worlds, comparatively to other World Championships, is that in the past, it's been very difficult to play a carry-oriented jungler. It felt like you always got forced to play the utility jungle, whether it was, you know, Sejuani or Trundle, or even like some early pressure jungle like Elysian or Elise. It was very rare, in which they don't really carry junglers. You kind of facilitate your laners to carry with your early pressure. Now it's like the first time where it felt like you could genuinely play Eve. You can where's Eve? You can actually play Eve and play around it. There's champions in the game that can make and actually facilitate you as a champion. Where the hell is Eve? I can't even see it right now. Dude, this is tilting me right now. The carry junglers are Hecarim, which is a very, very solid pick, and especially since the rise of these immobile carries like Jhin and like Ashe, Hecarim does a very good job against. Ezreal is one of the junglers that actually does very well against Hecarim, but the immobile carries, if we see people prioritizing Jhin and Ashe and things like that, we will see a lot more Hecarim in my opinion. Evelyn's probably just staring me in there. Oh, there it is. We can actually genuinely play these carry-oriented junglers. We can also see Karthus. You can build comps around these, in which, you know, we're probably going to see a lot more Galio. We'll see a lot more sets. We may even see a little bit more Twisted Fate. Things like that can actually facilitate these champions. But on the flip side, where I think the meta will shift after Lillia is banned, we're going to see a lot more utility junglers that have early strength and early skirmishing strength, can facilitate early dives. Then, after their early strength, their power spike, they turn into a bit of like a utility bot, create space and team vides, offer a lot of CC, and can facilitate those carries. So that's Shen, which is also potentially a three-way flex, top jungle support. That is also where Volibear does the same thing, early dives, early strength, that sort of thing. That is also set, same thing, early strength, a lot of dive potential, a lot of play potential in the early game, turning into a utility bot, doing basically no damage later into the game. I think the meta will really shift towards this style. And this is going to complement the Akali, it's going to complement the Lucian, it's going to complement this Zoe, this Azir very well. And I think, to be honest, that's where the meta is really going to shift. Because at the end of the day, man, you have a lot more options as a team in terms of proactivity when you have these junglers. And on top of that, I personally think that Shen is a good response to Graves. So, because if you think about it, you block the autos, it's you build very tanky, it's hard for Graves to really do anything. Plus, Yeah, in skirmishes. If he flashed taunts, they could basically burst Graves in the early game. So I think that Shen would be a decent response into Graves, which may reduce the priority on Graves. I actually want to do another tier here, guys. I want this tier here to be like the blindable, like a reliable jungle. Reliable jungle. Let's make this a different color. This is where I think Graves fits in. Yes, he's a carry jungle, but the great thing about Graves is that he's like one of those picks. It's like, all right, we need a jungle, we need a blind pick. We don't really want to give away our comp too much. Let's just pick Graves. That's kind of how I feel about Graves. Then we've got like the very situational comp dependent where you want to really push the pace of the game. I don't think we're going to see much Lee Sin at least personally. I think it's either going to go one or the other. We're going to go full utility or we're going to go full carry. I don't think we're going to see Echo jungle. I don't think we're going to see Kha'Zix jungle. Too weak, not enough options in the early game. I think we will see Gragas. Again, it can build runic echoes. I think if Lucian gets through, it'll be incredibly strong and incredibly powerful. It can create a lot of space for these champions. We may see it with Yasuo as a niche thing. We may see it with Pantheon as a niche strategy. I don't even know what other mid laners we may see it. And on top of that, guys, if we see a lot of Akali, Gragas is a great counter to Akali because you actually knock Akali out of the Shroud. So that's actually been something that has traditionally existed in the past. We probably will see Kindred because its versatility in the early game. It's kind of different to other carry junglers because it's strong in the early game. It has actually a lot of options in terms of pathing and early strength. So Kindred will be seen, I think. Olaf, I don't know where Olaf fits. We need to talk about Nidalee though. I can't believe why did I not talk about Nidalee earlier? Nidalee is borderline on another level. I do kind of think Nidalee is nearly S tier, but I'll just put her in carry junglers for now. Nidalee is great into Graves. It can dominate these carry junglers by exerting a lot of pressure. Its tempo is insane. If you make one mistake, Nidalee can literally take over a game. The only problem is with Nidalee is that it really tunnels you into the mid champs that you can play. It's very difficult to play. You can't play Nidalee Azir. You can't play Nidalee Orianna. You don't even really want to play Nidalee Syndra. Too high range. You don't want to play Nidalee Silas. No CC. A lot of these champions don't offer that much CC, so it really struggles. Like you're very tunneled into what champions, or it's a very niche strategy. So you may see it with Galio, we may see it with Set. To be honest with you, even Nidalee Lucian seems quite underwhelming. Yes, in theory, you have a lot of pressure, you can invade the jungle, but in terms of proactive plays, outside of invading the jungle, your skirmishing's so unreliable because having no CC is you're at a massive detriment in terms of forcing fights. They can easily disengage your fights and avoid your burst damage. So, Nidalee will be played and prioritized, but it'll be interesting to see what people play with it, and I think it will very much be determined or revolve around what we see in the mid lane. It'll be very interesting to see. Kane, I don't think we're going to see here. Let's go back to our list. What are we missing? Jarvan. Jarvan's another one here that we need to talk about. Jarvan generally always comes back into the meta around Worlds, purely because of how busted his kit is. Like, he's got a very loaded kit. A lot of proactive play potential. I can't even find... Where the hell is Jarvan here, guys? There we go. Jarvan usually finds its way back into the meta because it offers so much utility in compositions. Generally, as Worlds goes through the play-in stage, it goes through the group stages, people play a lot more solo queue-esque in those parts of the competition. As we get to quarters, semis, Worlds, what people realize is that the game comes back to laners and less about junglers. That's why, if you look back on any Worlds, really, it's very rare that comps or teams were playing carry-oriented junglers or playing through the jungle rather than playing through the laners. So I think we'll see a lot more Jarvan, we'll see a lot more Shen, Volley, Set, etc. as we get deeper into the competition. And at the start, we may see a lot more Hecarim, Eve, Karthus, Kindred, Nidalee, things like that, because people kind of want to cheese wins in a way. Or, you know, really, they feel like they want to be proactive and have options. And talking from experience here, team or players feel much more comfortable heading into a game knowing they have options to do things. It requires a lot of poise and focus to be able to be like, okay, We can't really make a proactive play in the early game here because maybe we don't have much CC or our jungler needs to get to X item spike. So we need to relax. Being a mid laner or a top laner or even like a support or any champion on the team or a laner, it can feel quite intimidating when you're versing. You see the enemy composition play something like a Set or a Volley or a Shen jungle when you've got like an Eve or a Hecarim or a Karthus or a Nidalee sometimes, because you're just like, how do we make a play here? We're not going to have pressure here. How are we going to navigate that? So from a mental aspect, if you're the one that has the options in the early game and can actually do things, take those early objectives and things like that, it can actually have a really nice psychological effect on your laners. That's just something to think about. Skarner, what was the champion that Skarner countered? I can't remember off the top of my head. Maybe it was a counter to... I can't remember off the top of my head. We'll have to come back to that one maybe, but I know it was a counter to one of these picks. Rengar, Rek'Sai, no. I think Rek'Sai is just too one-dimensional. Too much of a solo queue pick. Same as Kha'Zix, same as Kayn. Camille jungle, we won't see that, I don't think. Nunu, no. Talia jungle? We may see Talia jungle. If we have some niche Pantheon mid strategies, or we may see it in combination with something like a Twisted Fate or Galio or something like that, that does or can generate a lot of threat in the early game. I think that is basically all the junglers, guys. So now what we'll do is let's kind of bridge the gap between some of these. What are we seeing between these two tier lists here? I mean, given that Lucian and Lillia should be permabans, if we take Lucian off the... Let's just take Lucian, Akali, and Lillia out of the game. Let's take those three champions out of the game. Let's just say people don't want to deal with them and they may be banned. What looks to be strongest next? It looks a bit of Zoe, a bit of Ori, a bit of Azir, maybe even a bit of Set. So it could go two ways here, where we see this very control mage-oriented, lane bully-esque style, in which you'd probably benefit a lot more from having these utility junglers that can actually get a bit of river control, complement these champions that don't have as much hard CC. Even Syndra, sorry. I think Syndra should go here. Whoops. Syndra should go here. And give them river control and allow them to be lane bullies. Because if you're playing Azir and have full river control, you turn into a very obnoxious champion very quick. So that wouldn't surprise me. Or we're going to go down the route where we see a bit of Galio, a bit of Set, a bit of Twisted Fate, a bit of Leblanc. Not Leblanc, sorry. Galio, Set, and Twisted Fate play a little bit more utility oriented and see some of these carry junglers. You can kind of go down those two rabbit holes. Now, I'm not talking about top lane in this video. I'm not talking about bot lane, because those metas will actually largely influence these as well, because that's when things get very complicated. So now, to end this video, and before we kind of round things off a little bit here, let's quickly talk about the Worlds patch and how this may affect things. This Azir nerf, I don't think is that meaningful. It's like one extra auto attack in a team fight, which I don't think is a massively big deal. This base movement speed isn't that meaningful as well. I think the previous nerfs were kind of meaningful, but I don't think this one is. If need be, build an early tier 1 boots. I don't think it's the end of the world. Kate. I'm not really native carry. I can't tell you how much this affects her laning. But I'm assuming it's a decent nerf. But I still think we'll see priority on Kate. This is a relatively big center nerf. It's hard to say. I don't want to jump to any conclusions. So I don't want to say anything that's going to set you on the wrong track. So I'm gonna step back here and actually just hold my tongue here. I don't want to give you guys wrong information, because I don't really know enough about bot lane on the current meta. Akali, I mentioned this before, I don't think it's overly meaningful. I'll probably have to go into practice tool and maybe experiment with how that affects the breakpoint in terms of when that affects her wave clear, because if it does meaningfully change her wave clear, then maybe she won't be banned and maybe she won't be as prioritized as highly as I think. I said this Lucian buff nerf, sorry, isn't that big. Ahri's not going to be seen, not a big deal. Sivir traditionally has been a very nice response into Ezreal. We may see Sivir as a niche pick, but again, the spike, the early 2-item spike of Ezreal was kind of unmatched, so I don't think this is going to actually change Ezreal's priority. So this is not big enough nerf buff to change that. Vayne, too weak in the early game, too low range. Similar to Lucian AD carry, too low range. I don't think it will be seen. It may be seen as a top counterpick to some niche things. I don't know, but I don't think we'll see it in bot. Aphelios may be seen. I don't know enough about that. Sylas, very nice buff. That is going to increase the popularity of Sylas, especially as a two-way flex. This does also limit, by the way, teams picking these very ultimate-centric champions like Malphite. So keep an eye out for that one as well. Ivan, I don't think that changes Ivan too much. I don't think we'll see that. Too slow. It is dog shit. Aurelia, I think this is actually a very nice buff for Aurelia. So I do think we will see Aurelia mid or as a potential flex. So very interested to see how the first week or two goes of Worlds. I want to keep an open mind. It will change. Metas do evolve as the competition goes forward. But I think hopefully this kind of sets you on what I'm thinking anyway. I might be wrong here. This is just my hypothesis. Again, this is very different to solo queue. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts on both jungle and mid lane. Get back to me. Hopefully this gave you a bit of an insight. Oh, dude, I didn't even talk about Zillion, dude. How can I not talk about Zillion? Oh my goodness. We have to talk about Zillion quickly. Zillion. It was a niche NA pick, right? Bjergsen, and then Jensen played it as a response or something at some point to steal it away from him. Zillion is one of those very niche picks that is comp dependent. If you see low threat, low engage, and actually I think the reason why Bjergsen saw the opportunity to play Zillion is because the jungle picks were going to the Nidalee and Graves. Zillion, does very well into low CC composition or very low engaged compositions. So, if mid is dropped to later in the draft, it wouldn't surprise me if we do see Zillion as a niche pick. It definitely won't be picked earlier in the game because I think if the jungles pick these sorts of champs, these utility junglers, they play much faster. Zillion will struggle incredibly, will struggle a lot, sorry. So it's comp dependent, but it wouldn't surprise me if we do see it, especially from those NA teams. I don't know if China or Korea will play it, because I think they'll just be like, oh no, we'll deal with it. Because it does get dominated in lane by a lot of these champions. So very interesting to keep an eye on that as well. So that's it. I believe that's all the mid champions. Thanks for watching, guys. And I will take a look at the comments and appreciate the support, guys. Cheers.